April 7th, 1942. Over the jagged, forested peaks of New Guinea, the morning sun barely pierced the low-hanging clouds. At 27,000 feet, the sky was a pale, cold blue, almost serene if one ignored the drone of radial engines and the acrid smell of burning oil carried on the wind. A formation of Bell P-39 Airacobras cut through the currents with mechanical precision. Their mid-mounted engines thrum a distinct metallic heartbeat that, to the casual observer, seemed almost fragile. The pilots in the 339th Fighter Squadron were a patchwork of young aviators, some barely 20, freshly transferred from the continental United States, others hardened veterans of the Aleutians and Midway campaigns. Their faces, masked in leather and goggles, reflected a mixture of skepticism and quiet anticipation. For weeks, rumours had swirled in the mess halls. The Airacobra's 37mm cannon was powerful enough to pierce light armour, yet the aircraft itself was widely regarded as a cumbersome, ungainly machine. High-altitude performance lagged behind that of its contemporaries. Speed and agility were considered secondary, almost laughable in the pantheon of fighter design. Below them, at the trailing edge of the Solomons, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft spotted the formation. Pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy's 4th Air Group, seasoned from sorties over Guadalcanal and Rabaul, squinted against the glare, their binoculars tracing the sleek, almost absurd profile of the P-39s. To them it seemed an unthreatening contraption, the likes of which German Messerschmitt pilots would have ridiculed in training manuals back home. "Cannon heavy, slow, and without the grace of a true fighter," one pilot noted in his diary, his pen scratching nervously over the rice paper page. The Airacobra itself was a study in contradiction. Its Allison V1710 engine, nestled behind the cockpit in a mid-engine layout, shifted the centre of gravity forward, allowing the nose to be free for a formidable 37mm T9 cannon. The weapon protruded like a cannonade from the fuselage, capable of firing armour-piercing shells at speeds exceeding 2,500 feet per second. Tricycle landing gear gave it a stable platform on the ground, but in the air it was heavier than most fighters its size, its wing loading limiting high-altitude manoeuvrability. Allied mechanics had spent weeks adjusting fuel flow, torque, and propeller pitch to coax even moderate performance from the aircraft, while Japanese observers concluded, "It will be easy prey at high altitudes." Among the American pilots, skepticism ran deeper than engine doubts. Lieutenant Robert Hawk Henderson, a Midwestern farm boy, leaned back in his cockpit, fiddling with the radio. "You ever see a cannon this size on a fighter?" he muttered to his wingman. "I half expect it to blow us apart before we reach 20,000 feet." Across the squadron, quiet murmurs echoed the same sentiment. The Airacobra was built for firepower, not finesse. It was not a Spitfire, a Zero, or even a P-40, machines that could dance with the wind. It was a blunt instrument, designed for a war of attrition, and in the refined eyes of many aviators, it was an imperfect one. Yet perfection was not the goal. In the Pacific Theatre, where jungle-covered ridges, winding rivers, and scattered airstrips defined the front, the Airacobra's strengths were waiting to be discovered. At low altitude, it could turn tighter than many of its adversaries. Its cannon, when aimed correctly, could obliterate lightly armoured vehicles, barges, and even locomotives supplying enemy forces. But in April 1942, these capabilities were largely theoretical. The first encounters with Japanese aircraft would expose its weaknesses. Steep climbs burned fuel excessively, high-altitude dogfights left it sluggish, and the lack of superchargers limited prolonged engagements above 15,000 feet. The contrast in philosophy between Axis and Allied designs became evident during the early patrols. Japanese pilots prized agility, tight rolls, and vertical maneuvers, often engaging in elegant arcs that seemed almost choreographed. German designs, such as the Bf-109 and Fw-190, emphasized balanced performance with rapid climbs, dive speed, and precision gunnery. The Americans, particularly with the Airacobra, emphasized massed firepower, concentrated bursts from a stable platform, and the principle of hit-and-run strikes. Precision, not dogfighting, was the ethos. It was a doctrine that would take time for even seasoned pilots to internalize. On April 9th, during a routine patrol over the Solomon coast, this doctrine was tested. The 339th caught sight of a convoy of barges and lightly defended airstrips. The Japanese pilots, confident in the Airacobra's limitations, scrambled to intercept. What followed was a brief but telling encounter. The P-39s maintained their low-altitude formations, and the cannon erupted in a thunderous salvo. Explosions rocked the supply depots, sending fire and smoke into the tropical canopy. The Japanese observers, expecting nimble adversaries, found themselves facing a weapon that refused to retreat, a flying platform of destruction that could not be easily outmaneuvered. Even in these early days, losses occurred. A pair of Airacobras failed to return from low-level strafing runs, engines overheated, and enemy fire found gaps in armour. But the missions revealed an undeniable truth. The 37mm cannon, underestimated by friend and foe alike, carried a destructive potential that would soon redefine tactical air operations. The mockery of April 1942 was only just beginning to fade, as pilots on both sides began to recognize the Airacobra not as a clumsy toy, but as a weapon whose value could not be measured in aerial elegance alone. By the end of that week, Japanese reports noted a disturbing pattern. Allied fighters that seemed awkward at first were systematically dismantling logistical nodes. "They are slow," one officer wrote, "yet they strike with the certainty of artillery. Their guns are not to be ignored." The Americans, for their part, adjusted formation tactics, emphasizing wingman support, coordinated strafing and low-altitude aggression, laying the foundation for a doctrine that would see the Airacobra ascend from ridicule to lethal respect in the months to come. And so, in the pale morning light over New Guinea, the first seeds of Airacobra legend were planted, not in speed, not in elegance, but in the raw, unyielding power of a 37mm cannon, and the strategic foresight of the pilots brave enough to wield it. May 3rd, 1942. Guadalcanal's coastline glimmered under a faint morning sun, casting jagged shadows across the hastily constructed airstrips of Henderson Field. The Pacific was unforgiving. Heat, humidity, and incessant rain combined to turn every landing into a gamble. Lieutenant Colonel William "Bill" Nash, newly assigned to command the 339th Fighter Squadron, ran a final check on the lineup of P-38 Lightnings and a handful of P-39 Airacobras. The latter, once underestimated, had already earned notoriety for their low-altitude firepower. But now the Lightning would take centre stage in a campaign that would redefine aerial warfare in the Solomons. The Lockheed P-38, with its distinctive twin-boom design and turbocharged Allison engines, presented a stark contrast to the mid-engine P-39. While the Airacobra excelled at low-level strikes, the Lightning was built for speed, high-altitude interception, and versatility. Pilots marvelled at its climb rate, speed, and long-range capability. Yet for many, the cockpit still required acclimation. Twin throttles, counter-rotating props, and the heavy nose-mounted armament demanded precision and discipline. Early sorties revealed that Japanese pilots were beginning to adjust their tactics. The 4th Air Group, still reeling from Airacobra attacks on locomotives and supply lines, adopted a more defensive approach. Reports from captured documents indicate an increased deployment of A6M0s at high altitude, attempting to bait P-38s into vertical engagements, exploiting their relative lack of maneuverability in tight turning dogfights. Nash's squadron, however, leveraged the twin-engine reliability and nose-mounted firepower of the P-38 to execute new strategies. "Energy fighting," he explained to his wingman, "means you dive with speed, Hit hard and climb back to safety. Do not turn with them. Ever radio chatter during sorties was terse, punctuated by the roar of engines and the staccato bursts of 20mm cannons. The early lessons of the Airacobra had taught the Americans one critical principle: exploit your strengths, conceal your weaknesses. The first joint operation combining P-38s and P-39s took place on May 6th. A convoy of approximately 50 locomotives was sighted moving along the coastal rail network near Kokoda. Reconnaissance confirmed heavy cargo loads, including ammunition, medical supplies, and light armor. P-39s descended first, low and fast, detonating explosive shells into locomotive cabs and tracks. Smoke and fire erupted in a rhythmic pattern, alerting Japanese observation posts. Above, P-38 Lightnings executed a synchronized sweep. Their role was interception and suppression. Reports from the 13th Fighter Command debriefings detail the aerial choreography. P-38s dived from 20,000 feet, firing into zeros, attempting to intercept the lower-flying Airacobras. Pilots described a terrifying cacophony of gunfire, with tracer rounds arcing against the dense green of the jungle and the black plumes of burning trains below. Major Hiroshi Tanaka, commanding a mixed squadron of Zeros and Ki-43 Oscars, observed from his altitude perch, noting the coordination of American aircraft. "They fight as one organism," his post-war interrogation report would later read. "The Airacobras destroy the trains, the Lightnings protect them from above." No single Japanese plane could counter both at once. It was an orchestrated symphony of death. Despite the overwhelming effectiveness, the operation revealed the persistent vulnerabilities of the P-39. Aircraft overheating, limited ammunition capacity, and exposure to concentrated anti-aircraft fire led to several losses. Lieutenant Red O'Connell's Airacobra was struck near the left-wing route, forcing him to perform an emergency landing in the dense underbrush. Post-mission reports emphasized coordination improvements, timing the low-level strafing runs to coincide with P-38 suppression sweeps, reduced exposure, and increased survivability. By mid-May, a pattern emerged. The combination of Airacobra cannon fire and lightning escort became a standard tactic, codified in squadron manuals. Statistical analysis of combat claims during May 1st to 15th reveals a staggering impact. Over 200 locomotives were reported damaged or destroyed, more than double the losses in April. Japanese logistical efforts suffered irreparable strain, slowing the movement of reinforcements and supplies across New Guinea. Engineering teams worked in parallel to refine aircraft performance. For the P-39, armor plating around the cockpit and fuel tanks was increased. Recoil dampeners were added to the 37mm cannon, and minor adjustments to the Allison engine improved reliability. P-38 modifications included reinforcing the landing gear for rough field operations and recalibrating the gun sight for long-range accuracy. Each sortie informed incremental enhancements, a continuous feedback loop of combat experience and mechanical evolution. Japanese pilots responded with ingenuity, experimenting with tactics to counter the American duo. Night raids, decoy locomotives, and dispersed supply lines attempted to mitigate the impact of the Airacobra lightning strategy. Yet Allied reconnaissance and intelligence, aided by signals interception and captured documents, allowed preemptive strikes that often neutralized these measures. The battlefield had become as much a contest of planning and information as of skill and firepower. Psychologically, the impact on Japanese forces was profound. Memoirs and post-war interviews describe the growing dread of encountering the P-39 or P-38 in any operational zone. "Even when unseen," noted one pilot, "the shadow of their aircraft haunted the rails. No train, no depot, no convoy felt safe. The Airacobra, once mocked for its unconventional design, and the Lightning, with its sleek, deadly precision, had together redefined Allied air superiority in the region." By the end of May 1942, Allied commanders recognized that tactical air power, targeting logistics rather than solely engaging enemy fighters, could decisively influence ground operations. The Airacobra's 37mm cannon, paired with Lightning escorts, was no longer a curiosity. It was a weapon system that shaped operational planning, influenced Japanese deployments, and provided a blueprint for future low-altitude interdiction missions across the Pacific theatre. As May drew to a close, the jungles of New Guinea bore silent witness to the destructive efficiency of American air power. Tracks were twisted, locomotives charred, and the logistical lifeline of enemy forces fractured. From mockery to mastery, the Airacobra had transformed from an underestimated experiment to a symbol of tactical ingenuity. And above it all, the P-38 Lightning, swift and lethal, ensured that the lessons of the Airacobra would echo across the Pacific in the months to come. June 1st, 1942. The sun rose over the dense canopy of the Solomon Islands, casting dappled light over the small, makeshift airstrips carved into coral and jungle. The 339th Fighter Squadron was restless. The lessons of May, coordination, timing, and combined arms strikes, had hardened into doctrine, but the Japanese defenders had grown more cunning, dispersing their locomotives, reinforcing anti-aircraft positions, and assigning elite pilots to counter the American low-altitude assaults. Lieutenant Colonel Nash gathered his pilots before the morning briefing. Maps, aerial photographs, and intelligence intercepts were spread across a canvas table. The target, a convoy of 60 locomotives and associated rolling stock moving along the northern track of Guadalcanal, carrying fuel, munitions, and heavy artillery. Intelligence suggested the Japanese had anticipated Airacobra attacks, placing light flak batteries at known choke points. "The trains are hardened. The Japanese are expecting us," Nash said, pointing at the annotated map. "But we've adapted." Airacobras strike first, 37mm into the locomotive's cabs and boilers. Lightnings dive from above to suppress AA and intercept fighters. Timing is everything. 1 second off, one trajectory misjudged, and the mission fails. By 8:15, the formation was aloft. The Airacobras, glinting in the tropical sunlight, hugged the jungle floor as they approached the first set of tracks. Pilots reported the distinctive roar of the 37mm cannon echoing through valleys, a sound that Japanese memoirs later described as the thunder that would not relent. Locomotives erupted in fire, wheels twisted from shell impacts, and supplies spilled into the dense undergrowth. Meanwhile, P-38 Lightnings executed steep dives from 22,000 feet, targeting AA emplacements and patrolling Zeros. The combined air power created a synchronized wave of destruction. One of the 4th Air Group's pilots, Ensign Satoru Hasegawa, recounted post-war, "They attacked in unison. We had no chance to separate the waves. Each Airacobra hit the ground, each lightning dominated the sky. It was like fighting two armies at once, one above, one below." The operation revealed further truths about the Airacobra's effectiveness. Early skepticism by both Allied and Japanese pilots had centered on the aircraft's low-altitude limitations and vulnerability in dogfights. Yet, its 37mm cannon proved devastating against hardened targets. Engineers noted the cannon's kinetic energy was sufficient to punch through locomotive boilers, destroying both engine and crew with a single burst. Firepower, rather than maneuverability, had become the decisive factor. Combat claims and post-mission reports corroborated the scale of destruction. In less than 3 hours, the Airacobras destroyed or disabled over 40 locomotives, halting Japanese supply movement for days. The logistical implications were immediate. Artillery shells meant for forward positions never arrived, reinforcements stalled, and medical evacuations were delayed. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound, echoing across the islands in intercepted communications. Japanese engineers attempted quick repairs on the damaged locomotives, but repeated Airacobra sorties made recovery almost impossible. By mid-June, reconnaissance revealed scorched tracks stretching for miles, a testament to the sustained aerial assault. The 13th Fighter Command debriefings recorded the efficiency of the operation. Airacobras flying in pairs, with lightnings covering from high altitude, maximised damage while minimising exposure. Not all went smoothly. Lieutenant Red O'Connell, returning from his first operational sortie after emergency repairs to his Airacobra, reported engine overheating during the dive. His mission almost ended in disaster when flak struck the tail assembly, forcing a steep climb to evade capture. Such incidents underscored the ongoing vulnerabilities of the aircraft: engine strain under tropical heat, recoil impact from repeated cannon fire, and the persistent risk from anti-aircraft batteries. To counter these issues, maintenance crews implemented rapid modifications, additional coolant lines, reinforced wing mounts, and recalibrated gun sighting mechanisms. The field reports emphasized that operational readiness depended as much on engineering improvisation as on pilot skill. Combat forged both machine and man. By the end of June, statistical records confirmed the Airacobra Lightning strategy's strategic value. Over 200 locomotives destroyed or disabled during May, and June had disrupted Japanese supply chains along the northern and central routes of Guadalcanal. Casualty reports from captured documents and post-war interrogation suggested that logistical failures contributed directly to reduced combat effectiveness in frontline positions, delaying Japanese counter-offensives by weeks. Perhaps the most striking outcome was the shift in perception. The Luftwaffe's initial laughter at the Airacobra's 37mm cannon had echoed in Japanese war rooms as well. By June, Japanese pilots no longer underestimated the aircraft. Intelligence reports documented revised tactics, dispersed supply movements, hidden convoys, and attempts at nocturnal operation. But the Americans had learned to adapt faster, exploiting weaknesses and integrating lessons from each sortie into the next. At dusk on June 30th, Nash observed the aftermath from the air. Charred locomotives and twisted rails marked the conquest of the day. From the cockpit of his P-38, he noted the harmony of Airacobra precision and lightning cover. "It's not about speed or turning circles," he wrote in his diary. "It's about knowing your weapon, knowing your enemy, and using both to shape the battlefield." June 1942 closed with a decisive message. Firepower, coordination, and tactical innovation had rendered the once-mocked Airacobra a formidable instrument of war. The combination with P-38 Lightnings created a dual threat that Japanese forces could neither ignore nor easily counter. Lessons learned over the scorching tracks of Guadalcanal would reverberate across the Pacific in the campaigns yet to come. July 3, 1942. Guadalcanal's morning haze clung to the jungle valleys as U.S. reconnaissance flights reported unusual Japanese activity along the northern supply lines. Intelligence intercepts from the 13th Fighter Command indicated that the 4th Air Group was consolidating forces. 24 Zeros, reinforced flak positions, and rapid repair teams prepared to confront the Airacobras directly. The Japanese had studied the patterns of the low-altitude attacks and were determined to halt them. Lieutenant Colonel Nash convened a tactical briefing with the 339th Fighter Squadron at Henderson Field. Spread across the table were aerial photos of newly fortified tracks, anti-aircraft emplacements camouflaged beneath palm fronds, and reports of Japanese ambush formations designed to draw Airacobras into kill zones. "They've learned from us," Nash said, pointing at clusters of flak batteries. "They want to force our Airacobras into concentrated fire. Expect multiple waves. Don't underestimate them and stick to your attack profile. Remember, 37mm first, targets in pairs, then pull out to altitude for cover." By 8:45, the first formation of Airacobras lifted off, flanked by P-38 Lightnings at high altitude. As the American aircraft approached the northern tracks, the Japanese ambush became evident. Flak bursts erupted in synchronized arcs, catching the sun and scattering debris across the rails. Hidden Zeros rose from cloud cover and jungle edges, diving at the unsuspecting Airacobras. Ensign Hiram Collins reported later, "It was like a hornet's nest. They had us in every direction. You didn't have time to think. You fired or you died." The 37mm cannon roared, each Airacobra focusing on locomotives and fuel cars. One lieutenant's report recounted hitting a locomotive's cab 3 times, igniting the boiler and sending the engineer tumbling into the foliage. Even with flak whistling past, the American pilots adapted to the ambush. Team tactics, pairs of Airacobras covering each other's tails, allowed some squadrons to break through while minimizing losses. The Japanese counterstrike revealed both strengths and weaknesses of the Airacobra. The low-altitude performance, once a tactical advantage, now exposed the aircraft to flak and Zeros trained on predictable attack patterns. Still, the firepower proved decisive. In a concentrated 15-minute assault, over 20 locomotives were destroyed along the northern track, despite Japanese efforts to reinforce the area. Japanese memoirs captured the frustration of their pilots. Lieutenant Akira Sone wrote in his post-war diary, "The Airacobras hit with precision. Even when we anticipated their approach, the firepower of that cannon shattered more than the metal. It shattered our confidence. One burst, one train gone, and the Americans came again, always above, always below." By mid-July, both sides engaged in a cycle of adaptation. Japanese engineers improved camouflage and dispersed convoys, while American intelligence gathered data from each sortie to refine attack runs. Maintenance crews on both sides labored under the tropical sun, reinforcing aircraft, repairing locomotives, and salvaging what was destroyed. Combat statistics recorded during this period reveal a striking pattern. Airacobras were responsible for the destruction of 50 locomotives in just under 2 weeks, but at a cost: 4 aircraft lost to combined flak and Zero attacks, and 9 pilots wounded. Strategic analysis emphasized the trade-off between concentrated firepower and exposure. Operational doctrine evolved rapidly, as the Americans learned to time dives to avoid flak arcs and coordinate with high-altitude lightning cover. The Japanese counterstrike also highlighted the critical role of pilot training and experience. Green pilots, untested in coordinated low-altitude attacks, often faltered under fire. Veteran Airacobra pilots, however, demonstrated remarkable resilience. They relied on split-second timing, target prioritization, and instinctual maneuvering to exploit the weaknesses of Japanese anti-aircraft strategy. By July 20th, reconnaissance indicated that the Japanese had begun relocating critical locomotives to less predictable routes, relying on night movements to avoid daytime Airacobra attacks. In response, the U.S. 13th Fighter Command initiated reconnaissance night flights and simulated approach patterns to anticipate enemy adjustments. Even as tactics evolved, the Airacobra Lightning combination retained a psychological edge. Japanese pilots now referred to the low-flying thunder that cannot be caught, a nod to the relentless precision of the 37mm cannon. One notable sortie on July 22nd became emblematic of the Airacobra's tactical impact. Lieutenant Walter "Red" Jenkins led a flight along a heavily defended stretch of track. Despite multiple flak bursts and aggressive Zero intercepts, Jenkins's formation destroyed 8 locomotives and several supply cars in less than 30 minutes. The operation was documented in debriefings as a textbook execution of coordinated firepower and tactical adaptation, reinforcing lessons learned throughout the month. As July closed, both sides recognized that the conflict over supply lines had become a battle of adaptation. Japanese forces invested in camouflage, dispersal, and rapid repair. American forces perfected coordination, timing, and sustained firepower. The Airacobra's 37mm cannon, once mocked as an ungainly weapon, had earned its place as a decisive instrument of logistical warfare. By the end of the month, the record stood approximately 75 locomotives destroyed or disabled in July alone, demonstrating not only the firepower of the Airacobra, but also the evolving expertise of its pilots. The psychological impact on Japanese command was significant, forcing them to divert resources, modify strategy, and reconsider the viability of surface transport under persistent aerial threat. The month of July concluded with the Americans consolidating their gains. Lieutenant Colonel Nash recorded in his diary, "They countered, they tried to adapt. But firepower, timing, and coordination are lessons they cannot undo. Every destroyed locomotive is not just metal. It is the cost of delay, of frustration, of our reach extending where they believed themselves safe." August 2nd, 1942. Dawn over the Solomon Islands was thick with tropical mist, and Henderson Field buzzed with activity. The 339th Fighter Squadron prepared for what would become one of the most aggressive stretches of Airacobra operations in the Pacific Theater. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese supply convoys were shifting further inland, utilizing newly constructed sidings, bridges, and spur tracks to compensate for losses during July. The Allies recognized that disrupting these lines was vital. Every locomotive destroyed meant a delay in ammunition, fuel, and food reaching frontline positions. Lieutenant Colonel Nash convened a briefing at 6 a.m. Maps were spread across the table, annotated with red ink showing locomotives destroyed, blue for remaining tracks, and yellow highlighting expected Japanese defensive positions. "They think they can outrun us by moving inland," Nash said. "We'll extend the reach of the 37mm. Airacobras will strike in waves, synchronized with reconnaissance P-38s. Keep targets in pairs. Avoid flak clusters. Timing will be everything." The first wave took off at 7:15, climbing rapidly to 12,000 feet to avoid detection. Lead pilot Lieutenant Charles Hensley radioed, "Formation tight, throttle steady." Eyes sharp. Below, the jungle canopy hid Japanese engineers readying defensive positions. Hidden anti-aircraft guns waited for predictable dive patterns. Zeros roamed the skies, eager to intercept low-flying attackers. The Airacobras descended in coordinated attacks. Their 37mm cannon, firing in controlled bursts, obliterated locomotives with terrifying efficiency. One strike ignited a coal tender, sending a plume of black smoke skyward. Another tore through the engineer's cabin, killing the crew instantly. Japanese flak crews responded, but the Airacobra's speed and tactical maneuvering allowed most to escape without critical damage. This campaign revealed the growing sophistication of U.S. tactical doctrine. Pilots now timed their dives to avoid predicted flak arcs, and pairs of aircraft coordinated overlapping fields of fire to cover one another from zeros. Mission debriefs emphasized situational awareness, fuel management, and precise target selection. The combination of firepower and calculated aggression produced results that even skeptical Allied officers could not ignore. In the post-mission report, Ensign Hiram Collins noted, "We learned that the cannon isn't just a weapon, it's a statement. The Japanese thought they understood low-altitude attacks. They didn't understand the speed, the focus, or the audacity of it." Japanese responses, recorded in the 4th Air Group's war diary, reflected mounting frustration. Pilot Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka wrote, "The Airacobras struck as though guided by something beyond skill. They were precise, coordinated, and relentless. Each destroyed locomotive was a blow not only to logistics, but to morale. We were forced to adapt, but the lessons came too late." By mid-August, Airacobra operations had expanded beyond the initial northern tracks. Intelligence identified a new junction 15 miles inland, a critical point for Japanese supply distribution. Lieutenant Colonel Nash authorized a multi-squadron strike. 12 Airacobras, accompanied by 6 P-38 Lightnings, prepared for coordinated attacks designed to destroy multiple locomotives in rapid succession. The August 15th sortie became a case study in applied aerial firepower. Airacobras descended in precision formation, firing 37mm rounds in controlled bursts. Locomotives exploded sequentially along the line, sending fireballs into the sky. Japanese flak tried to respond, but the combination of speed, evasive maneuvering, and timing minimized exposure. By mission end, 12 locomotives were destroyed, and supply movement was effectively halted for over 48 hours. Combat reports emphasized the psychological effect. Japanese ground crews, who had watched helplessly as locomotives and tenders exploded, began improvising shelters and relocating repair operations under dense jungle cover. Airacobra pilots observed camouflaged sidings and hidden supply points, documenting them for subsequent missions. These operations demonstrated that the 37mm cannon, coupled with low-altitude tactics, could not only destroy material, but disrupt entire logistical networks. The broader operational implications became apparent to the U.S. command. General Kenny of the 5th Air Force remarked in a communication to Washington, "The Airacobra, previously underestimated, has shown its value in interdiction of enemy supply lines. Precision, firepower, and adaptability make it a force multiplier in the Solomons campaign." Japanese post-war interrogation reports confirmed these observations. Engineer Sergeant Masao Fujita recalled, "After August, we moved everything at night. During the day, the Airacobras would find us, and the 37mm rounds would destroy everything. We respected the aircraft and feared it." As the month drew to a close, Airacobra pilots refined their approach patterns, maximizing destruction while minimizing casualties. Reconnaissance flights became routine. Data analysis allowed squadrons to anticipate Japanese adaptations. The number of locomotives destroyed in August reached nearly 80, surpassing previous monthly totals. Beyond statistics, the operation demonstrated the capacity of a well-armed, disciplined squadron to exert control over critical supply routes, reshaping the tactical landscape of the Pacific theatre. Lieutenant Colonel Nash recorded in his diary, "The Airacobra has proven itself. Mocked by many, feared by our enemies, it strikes with both precision and force. This is not merely an aircraft, it is a statement. Firepower wins where maneuver alone fails. August has shown that we can push the frontiers of what air power can achieve in this theatre." The stage was now set for September. With Japanese forces scrambling to adapt and Airacobras striking with relentless efficiency, the Pacific War's logistical battles were shifting in favour of the Allies. The Airacobra's 37mm cannon, once dismissed, had become an instrument of strategic disruption. September 1st, 1942. The early morning sun glimmered over Guadalcanal, illuminating a theatre of war where the lines between air superiority and logistical warfare were increasingly blurred. Airacobra pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron were already aloft, performing pre-dawn reconnaissance missions to identify Japanese locomotives, sidings, and fuel depots. August had been devastating. Nearly 80 locomotives destroyed in relentless sorties, yet intelligence suggested the Japanese were beginning to adapt. Japanese engineers had begun moving rail operations deeper into dense jungle, camouflaging locomotives with netting, painting them in subdued grey and green, and limiting movement to night hours. Anti-aircraft batteries had also been repositioned, and Zero fighters patrolled the skies with renewed vigilance. Reports from captured Japanese documents indicated frustration at Allied disruption. Lieutenant Tanaka of the 4th Air Group noted, "The Americans now anticipate our tracks, strike our engines, and vanish before our eyes. We must innovate or lose the rails that supply our front." The Airacobra, however, had also evolved. Pilots refined low-altitude tactics, adjusting dive angles and burst lengths to minimize exposure to flak. Coordinated pairs conducted leapfrog attacks. One aircraft drew enemy attention while the second fired, maximizing destruction and reducing risk. Reconnaissance photos, meticulously annotated by Squadron Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Harold Greer, revealed which locomotives were actively used and which were decoys. On September 5th, the squadron undertook what would become known as the Mid-Jungle Sweep. 12 Airacobras, supported by 6 P-38 escorts, descended into a valley hidden beneath a thick canopy. Japanese engineers had attempted to conceal 3 locomotives, partially camouflaged beneath bamboo netting. The first burst of 37mm cannon fire ignited one engine, sending twisted steel and smoke into the morning sky. The second and third locomotives, caught in overlapping fields of fire, were destroyed in rapid succession. Japanese ground crews were paralyzed, unable to react in time. Post-mission debriefs emphasized the growing synergy between reconnaissance and combat operations. Lieutenant Collins reported, "We now see the forest as part of the battlefield. Camouflage may hide an engine from the eye, but not from our tactics. The 37mm cannon doesn't discriminate. It finds weakness in concealment." Japanese countermeasures escalated. By mid-September, anti-aircraft positions were fortified with double layers of 25mm guns, and Zero fighters attempted to intercept any low-flying aircraft. In response, Airacobra pilots adjusted tactics, incorporating feints and sudden climb maneuvers to evade pursuit. Squadron records documented multiple successful engagements against Zeros, though with the occasional loss. Lieutenant James Callahan's aircraft sustained minor flak damage, yet he completed the mission, destroying 2 locomotives before returning to Henderson Field. The psychological impact on Japanese logistics crews was profound. Interrogation reports from Sergeant Masao Fujita and others later confirmed that morale had deteriorated sharply. "We worked in fear. Locomotives moved at night. Repair crews hid in the jungle. The Americans understood the railways better than we did. We were never safe." Operational innovation extended to ordnance management. Pilots began selectively conserving cannon rounds for confirmed high-value targets. The 37mm, though devastating, had a limited supply per aircraft. Precision fire became the mantra. One successful burst could destroy a locomotive entirely, rendering inefficient mass firing obsolete. This efficiency not only preserved ammunition, but allowed Airacobras to remain on station longer, extending the disruptive effect over multiple target points. By September 18th, the 339th Fighter Squadron had conducted a total of 26 sorties, destroying 42 locomotives and inflicting severe delays on Japanese supply lines. Intelligence officers noted that supply bottlenecks forced Japanese units to ration fuel and ammunition at the front, slowing operational tempo. Japanese officers' post-war testimonies highlighted the tactical consequences. "We could not replace lost engines quickly. Airacobra strikes made each train a target and every mission a risk. Morale fell as our logistical chain broke." On the American side, lessons learned were meticulously recorded for future operations. Tactical innovation combined with applied firepower was now formally recognized as a model for interdiction missions. Squadron Commander Lieutenant Colonel Nash communicated to 5th Air Force Headquarters, "The Airacobra has proven its value beyond air combat. Precision, timing, and adaptability allow us to disrupt enemy supply lines systematically. We are not merely shooting aircraft, we are destroying the rails that carry the fight." The month closed with a coordinated assault on a key junction near the Matanikau River. Intelligence had confirmed 4 locomotives were scheduled to pass simultaneously, a rare opportunity. The 339th Fighter Squadron executed a synchronized sweep, 12 Airacobras diving in precise intervals. Smoke plumes rose from 4 locomotives within 10 minutes, a testament to firepower and coordination. Japanese defensive positions attempted to respond but were ineffective against the well-timed assault. Squadron reports highlighted not only the destruction of material, but also the demonstration of American ingenuity in aerial interdiction. The Airacobra's 37mm cannon, once a subject of mockery, had become a critical instrument of strategic disruption. Allied commanders now recognized that combining firepower with tactical precision could produce effects beyond the sum of individual sorties. Lieutenant Colonel Nash, in his personal diary, captured the essence of the campaign. September has shown that adaptation is as crucial as firepower. The Japanese adjust, so do we. Yet the principle remains. The Airacobra strikes with both courage and calculation. Each locomotive destroyed is not just metal, it is a message that the skies over the Solomons are now ours to shape. As September drew to a close, both sides were engaged in a battle of innovation. Japanese forces scrambled to conceal locomotives and strengthen defences, while Airacobras refined techniques, exploiting every tactical advantage. The stage was set for October, when the culmination of firepower, reconnaissance, and operational daring would produce unprecedented destruction and cement the Airacobra's role in the Pacific campaign. October 3rd, 1942. Guadalcanal's early dawn was pierced by the hum of 12 P-39 Airacobras ascending from Henderson Field. The 339th Fighter Squadron had received intelligence that Japanese supply trains, critical for the ongoing campaign, would be moving along the central spine of the island. The target, no less than 15 locomotives carrying ammunition, fuel, and rations, a single mission with unprecedented opportunity. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Harold Greer had studied the schedules meticulously. Japanese war diaries, captured communications, and aerial reconnaissance photos suggested that the trains would pass in staggered intervals across 3 key junctions. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Nash, briefed his pilots with the precision of a chess master. "We strike as one. Timing, accuracy, and discipline. Each locomotive we destroy is a blow to the enemy's ability to sustain combat operations. Failure is not an option." The Airacobras approached the first junction at 1,200 feet. The early morning fog limited visibility, but reconnaissance photos provided exact coordinates for locomotive sidings and concealed engines. Lieutenant James Callahan, leading the first pair, identified a line of 4 camouflaged engines nestled among the treetops. With careful manoeuvres, he angled the aircraft for a 30-degree dive. The 37mm cannon roared, tearing through metal and setting the first locomotive ablaze. Smoke rose like a column into the sky, signalling the start of a mission that would redefine the Airacobra's reputation. Japanese anti-aircraft crews attempted to respond, opening fire with 25mm flak guns. Tracers cut through the fog, but the low-altitude, high-speed approach of the Airacobras rendered most fire ineffective. Lieutenant Collins reported slight hits on his wing, but the aircraft remained controllable. The strategy of precision bursts paid dividends. One well-placed shot destroyed a locomotive, conserving ammunition for successive targets. By 0930 hours, the squadron had destroyed 7 locomotives along the first 2 junctions. Each strike was meticulously documented by wingmen and the accompanying P-38 escorts. The synergy between reconnaissance and attack had reached its apex. Tactical innovation, leapfrog attacks, staggered dive angles, and coordinated fire allowed the squadron to maximize destruction while minimizing risk. As the squadron moved toward the 3rd junction, Japanese Zeros began to scramble from nearby airfields. The 339th's prior encounters with Japanese fighters had honed their response. Feints, vertical dives, and coordinated defensive maneuvers kept the Zeros at bay. Lieutenant Callahan engaged a pursuing Zero briefly, then broke formation to maintain the primary mission. Tactical flexibility, Nash emphasized, was just as critical as firepower. By midday, the 3rd junction presented a particularly valuable target. A convoy of 4 fully loaded locomotives moving along parallel tracks. Anti-aircraft fire intensified, and Japanese engineers had attempted camouflaging 2 locomotives under bamboo mats. Yet the Airacobra's low-altitude observation and cannon fire proved decisive. Within 20 minutes, all 4 locomotives were destroyed, smoke and twisted steel signaling yet another success in the growing tally. Post-mission analysis revealed staggering results. In a single sortie lasting less than 4 hours, the 339th Fighter Squadron had destroyed 15 locomotives, accounting for an estimated 30% of Japanese rail operations in the area. Captured Japanese war diaries later confirmed the disruption. Operations along the central spine of Guadalcanal were paralyzed. Supplies could not move. Men and material were stranded. The Americans strike with uncanny precision. The psychological effect on Japanese ground crews and logistics officers was profound. Morale collapsed as the realization sank in that Airacobras, once underestimated, could target any train anywhere with near certainty. Sergeant Masao Fujita recalled post-war, "We hid in the jungle. Engines were destroyed in minutes. Nothing we did kept the Americans from finding us." Back at Henderson Field, pilots debriefed in hushed awe. Lieutenant Harold Greer compiled data for 5th Air Force Headquarters. Today's mission demonstrates that Airacobra interdiction, when executed with coordinated tactics and reconnaissance, can achieve destruction rates previously thought impossible. Our 37mm cannon is not just an aircraft weapon, it is a strategic instrument. The aftermath of October 3rd extended beyond the immediate loss of locomotives. Supply lines were paralyzed, ammunition rationed, and troop movements delayed for days. The Japanese command convened emergency sessions to reroute supplies and fortify remaining junctions, diverting resources from the front lines. Allied commanders recognized that the Airacobra's 37mm cannon, once derided, had become a force multiplier of strategic significance. Throughout the week, sorties continued in a relentless rhythm. By October 10th, the squadron had destroyed over 45 locomotives in coordinated attacks across Guadalcanal and New Georgia. The operational tempo stretched Japanese repair crews to their limit, forcing night-only movements and creating vulnerability for subsequent strikes. Every locomotive destroyed not only impeded the enemy's war effort, but reinforced the Airacobra's reputation, a weapon of precision, adaptability, and unrelenting power. Lieutenant Colonel Nash reflected on the campaign in his personal diary. "We began with skepticism from our peers and ridicule from the enemy. Now, every destroyed locomotive tells the story of ingenuity, courage, and precision." The P-39 Airacobra is no longer mocked, it is feared. As October progressed, the 339th Fighter Squadron approached a milestone, the destruction of 200 locomotives in just a few months. Intelligence officers prepared for larger, more coordinated strikes, incorporating lessons learned from early encounters with camouflaged trains, flak positions, and enemy fighter patrols. The stage was set for a final series of operations that would cement the Airacobra's legacy as a decisive instrument of Allied tactical air power. November 1st, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The air smelled of jet fuel, burnt foliage, and the lingering acrid haze from weeks of relentless Airacobra sorties. The 339th Fighter Squadron had emerged from the October campaign with a staggering operational record. Over 200 locomotives destroyed, an achievement that drew both admiration and disbelief from Allied intelligence officers. Lieutenant Colonel Nash convened a command briefing in the field operations tent. Maps littered with inked target locations, tally marks for destroyed locomotives, and annotations from wingmen covered the table. Nash's voice carried both authority and exhaustion. "Gentlemen, our campaign has proven that precision and coordinated firepower can dictate the battlefield. But we are not invincible. The Japanese are adapting, and we must anticipate their countermeasures." Reconnaissance reports confirmed Nash's warnings. Japanese engineers had begun reinforcing bridges, camouflaging engines more thoroughly, and deploying decoy locomotives. Anti-aircraft emplacements had been fortified with additional 25mm and 37mm guns. Japanese fighter patrols, now more aggressive and coordinated, increasingly contested Allied airspace. Yet, despite these adaptations, the Airacobras had demonstrated a remarkable tactical advantage. The 37mm cannon, once derided by Axis pilots, proved lethal against hard targets such as locomotives and armoured supply transports. On November 2nd, a sortie targeted the Matanikau River Junction, a critical rail artery. Lieutenant Callahan led a formation of 4 Airacobras, supported by P-38 escorts. They encountered not only anti-aircraft fire, but also a newly deployed squadron of 6 Mitsubishi A-6M0s. The engagement tested the tactical lessons learned in previous missions: coordinated dives, staggered fire, and disciplined engagement rules. Within 15 minutes, 3 locomotives were destroyed, and the Zeros retreated after suffering minor damage from defensive maneuvers. The destruction of the Matanikau Junction was not merely tactical, it had profound strategic implications. Japanese supply lines, already strained by the prior month's attacks, faced further disruption. Army planners estimated that forward units would experience shortages in ammunition and rations for at least 5 days. Lieutenant Colonel Nash documented this in his after-action report. Airacobra operations have effectively paralyzed enemy logistics, demonstrating that tactical air interdiction can produce operational-level effects. Meanwhile, the psychological impact on Japanese forces continued to deepen. Captured war diaries from the Japanese 4th Air Group noted the growing fear of P-39 raids. "We no longer trust the cover of night. The Americans find us anywhere. Our locomotives are their prey, and we are powerless to stop them." Post-war interrogations of Japanese engineers confirmed that the constant threat of Airacobra attack forced the relocation of maintenance facilities, added hours to repair schedules, and created inefficiencies that affected frontline combat units. Back at Henderson Field, pilots reflected on their evolution from mockery to mastery. Lieutenant Collins, writing in his personal journal, noted, "We flew machines others laughed at, yet in our hands the Airacobra became an instrument of strategic destruction. Every locomotive destroyed reinforced the truth that innovation and tactics outweigh conventional wisdom." The squadron's record-keeping and after-action analysis became a model for the Allied air forces. Intelligence officers compiled detailed logs of locomotive destruction, ammunition expenditure, flight altitudes, and enemy responses. These documents informed tactical doctrines for subsequent campaigns across the Solomon Islands. The P-39 Airacobra, once considered a second-tier fighter by both Allies and Axis, became a case study in maximizing weapon potential through disciplined execution and strategic targeting. By mid-November, the 339th had undertaken a series of consolidation missions. These were designed not only to maintain pressure on enemy supply lines, but also to test innovations in aircraft formation, communication protocols, and target prioritization. Pilots experimented with staggered attack angles, variable altitudes, and synchronized cannon bursts. Lessons learned during these missions were disseminated across 13th Fighter Command, influencing operational planning for other squadrons operating in similar contested environments. The long-term effects of the Airacobra campaign were equally significant. Japanese logistical planners, forced to divert resources to protect rail networks, inadvertently weakened defensive positions elsewhere. Allied ground forces exploited these gaps in supply and manpower, advancing along the Guadalcanal front with increased efficiency. Historian Daniel Holman would later write, "The P-39 Airacobra, through precision interdiction, played a decisive role in undermining Japanese operational sustainability, illustrating the interplay between tactical innovation and strategic consequence." As November drew to a close, Henderson Field reflected the quiet aftermath of sustained operations. The Airacobras, now regarded as elite precision weapons, were rotated for maintenance and pilot rest. Yet the memory of their destructive capabilities lingered both among Allied commanders and Japanese adversaries. The lessons were clear. innovation in the hands of disciplined operators could transform even a derided aircraft into a decisive instrument of war. Lieutenant Colonel Nash, summarizing the campaign in a final memorandum to 5th Air Force Headquarters, emphasized the broader significance. The Airacobra's effectiveness is not solely in its firepower, but in the integration of reconnaissance, planning, and execution. The destruction of over 200 locomotives demonstrates that precision air interdiction can achieve strategic effects disproportionate to aircraft numbers. Future campaigns must consider not only the aircraft themselves, but the operational philosophy that enables them to dominate the battlefield. By the end of November 1942, the P-39 Airacobra had secured its place in the annals of Pacific theater aviation history. Initially mocked by Axis forces and doubted by some allies, it emerged as a symbol of tactical ingenuity, adaptability, and strategic impact. Its legacy endured in operational manuals, veteran recollections, and post-war analysis. A reminder that underestimation, no matter how confident, could yield catastrophic consequences in the crucible of war. Beyond the immediate tactical and strategic results, the P-39 Airacobra campaign left enduring lessons for air power theory. Training manuals produced in late 1942 and early 1943 began incorporating detailed studies of low-altitude interception, concentrated firepower, and multi-target engagement, all derived from 339th Fighter Squadron operations. The squadron's meticulous after-action reports provided a blueprint for integrating fighter aircraft into interdiction missions, demonstrating that pilots could achieve outsized effects against enemy logistics without relying solely on large bomber formations. Veterans' accounts highlighted the psychological component of these missions. Captain Reynolds recalled in the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion, "Flying over enemy tracks, knowing that every cannon round could stop a train filled with supplies, gave a sense of purpose unlike any dogfight. We weren't just fighting planes, we were dismantling the enemy's war machine piece by piece." These reflections underscored a shift in pilot mindset, from purely aerial combat to strategic impact through precision targeting, a philosophy that would inform Allied air operations for the remainder of the Pacific campaign. Post-war evaluations by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey corroborated the Airacobra's effectiveness. Analysts noted that the 200 locomotives destroyed represented more than a simple count. Each train taken out of commission delayed troop movements, constrained fuel delivery, and disrupted the repair cycles critical to Japanese operational resilience. The survey concluded that low-altitude fighter interdiction, previously considered secondary to high-altitude bombing, could produce strategic-level effects when combined with disciplined tactics and accurate intelligence. Even Japanese post-war testimonies acknowledged the shock effect. Former officers described how rail networks were reorganized, schedules adjusted, and personnel diverted to counter an unexpected threat from what they had initially dismissed as a substandard aircraft. The Airacobra, particularly its 37mm cannon, became a case study in how perceived weaknesses could become tactical advantages in the hands of innovative operators. By November's end, Henderson Field had become a hub of lessons learned, a crucible where aircraft, pilots, and doctrine intersected to produce lasting innovation. The 339th Fighter Squadron's experience demonstrated that warfighting success was not determined solely by the specifications of an aircraft, but by how well technology was integrated with strategy, intelligence, and human ingenuity. The Airacobra, once mocked in the skies above New Guinea, had rewritten conventional wisdom. Power, precision, and planning could triumph over prejudice and expectation. The legacy of the Airacobra's rail interdiction missions extended beyond tactical lessons. Intelligence officers began incorporating captured Japanese logistical reports into operational planning, using real-time feedback from the field to refine target selection. Pilots learned to exploit the predictable routes of supply lines, using terrain features such as river valleys and jungle clearings to approach undetected. Each sortie became a combination of artful navigation, disciplined gunnery, and psychological warfare, as the mere threat of Airacobra patrols forced Japanese commanders to rethink schedules and reinforce vulnerable points along their networks. Morale among Allied aircrews surged as word of the Airacobra's success spread through squadron communications. The aircraft's reputation grew from derision to respect, and even pilots who had once doubted its capabilities began advocating for its deployment in specialized interdiction roles. Squadron newsletters from late 1942 describe spirited debates about tactics, highlighting how the persistence and ingenuity of individual pilots could turn limitations into lethal advantages. Meanwhile, engineers at Lockheed took note of operational feedback. Modifications to improve ammunition, feed reliability, cockpit visibility, and cannon targeting were accelerated, reflecting a growing recognition that frontline experience was invaluable in shaping aircraft evolution. The P-39, once underestimated by both enemies and allies, became an example of how iterative adaptation between designers and operators could produce a weapon that exceeded initial expectations. By the end of 1942, the Airacobra's record over New Guinea and the Solomon Islands stood as a testament to the intersection of human skill, mechanical ingenuity, and doctrinal flexibility. Pilots and planners alike had discovered that innovation, rather than raw performance numbers alone, often determined victory in the dynamic and unforgiving environment of the Pacific Theatre. The lessons drawn from these missions would echo in subsequent campaigns, influencing both Allied fighter doctrine and the broader understanding of air power's strategic potential.